The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, the Tokin Jew in Alameda, California, Tokin with an I. And I have the greatest gig in the world because I speak to some of the most interesting people on the planet week after week. Today is no exception. I'm bringing back Artie Sorce, and I don't think I'm really pronouncing your name properly.
It's actually Sorce in Sicilian, but you know what? I like Artie Sorce. I feel like I could be Herb's grandson.
Well, as if being Artie Sr.'s son isn't enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me a little bit about him before we get started. We talked briefly about your heritage. Tell me the influence you had on you.
My dad grew up in the Bronx, Ralph, and
okay.
He grew up on 33rd and Arthur Avenue, and he was infatuated by Fordham football, the Fordham Rams, you know, the 7 blocks of granite. He used to carry Vince Lombardi's bags for the Rams of Fordham back in the the late 30s, early 40s.
And this is before Vince Lombardi. Before Vince Lombardi was an assistant coach in the pros with the New York Giants.
Well, my dad actually played for Lombardi when he coached the Giants in the 50s. And,
really?
Yeah, he was incredible. He was all city at Cardinal Hayes High School as a freshman, sophomore, and junior. And then his senior year, my grandfather, who was a shoe designer, and my grandmother, who was a wedding dressmaker, my grandfather moved to South Pasadena, California, and took a job for this big shoe company. He invented the old cork clog, if you recall, back in the 50s and 60s. And so my dad came out to California in the early 50s. His senior year was at South Pasadena High School. And the old joke was Mike Giddings, who was one of the great coaches in football, coached for the 49ers, and was John McKay's defensive coordinator at USC, and also in the World Football League with the Hawaii Islanders. He said when my dad drove up, it was like a full-grown man, you know, growing up in New York at 17, and then you come to California, and he said, you know, he had to shave twice a day, and my dad just, you know, fell in love with Southern California. Who wouldn't after coming from the Bronx, right? His girlfriend was a gal named Diana Dial, who owned Dial Corporation. They had a 17-car garage, and Dad had a car that had no floorboards in it, you know. And so he saw the real world. He saw things change a lot. And one of the great things was my dad actually broke his ankle in 7 places at Old Soldier Field in the late 50s, and that kind of took his career away from him in football. But he wound up working for the Department of Defense, and we lived in Japan, Germany, Spain, and England while I was growing up my first 14 years. So I was going to tell you this about coming into San Francisco as a little kid on the USS Sultan with my AM radio that I had bought in Japan, transistor radio, and listening to the San Francisco Giants and the Dodgers play a game. I was 7 years old, 1964, and they were playing at the old Candlestick Park, and we're in the ship coming into San Francisco Harbor, and I remember listening to Willie Mays hit a home run that day off of Sandy Koufax, and I was thinking of just how great Major League Baseball was, and those great Giant teams with Jim Ray Hart and, you know, Willie McCovey and Willie Mays and Juan Marichal and, you know, even a little bit prepared.
Jim Perry was on that pitching staff. That was tremendous teams, and they finish they finished behind the Dodgers an inordinate amount of times. It always seemed, except in '62, it always seemed like the Dodgers or
and
the
you know what?
Braves.
They had some bad luck in '62. I mean, McCovey up at the plate, in the ninth inning, hits a line shot that goes right to Richardson at second base, and Bobby makes the catch, or that game would have been completely different. But I got to tell you, I was always a little bit of a Giants fan. That's why Freddie Wallen and I laugh every once in a while, because I remember Wes Westrum, and I remember guys like Alvin Dark, and I remember Jimmy Davenport, and I always remember the Giants because the only games we saw in California were the Dodger games broadcast on KTTV with the great Vin Scully, and those were the only games that were actually televised. It's not like now in baseball where every game pretty much is on TV somewhere.
Artie, that rivalry that you mentioned, the Giants and Dodgers, and with all due respect to the Yankees and the Red Sox, it is the greatest rivalry in history. I mean, decades of those two teams hating each other. Back when there were only 8 teams in the division in a league, and they were year to year on top of the pack.
And the other thing, Ralph, is they were tied together, whether it was Horace Stoneham and Walter O'Malley. They needed to come together to even move out to the West Coast because one couldn't do it without the other. And so there was also, that part of it as well. And as you know, Ralph, being a West Coast guy that moved out from the East Coast, in those days, the old Pacific Coast League with the San Francisco Seals and
the Oakland Oaks,
the LA Angels, the Oakland Oaks, the Tacoma Rainiers. I mean, they played great baseball because you said it earlier. There were only 8 major league teams. Now there's 32 major league teams. So basically, AAA was like, playing for the Texas Rangers or the Oakland A's now. I feel sorry for them with the attendance they're going through this year. But yes, the baseball has been definitely changed. And I tell you what, those old Dodger-Giant rivalry games were something to behold.
And no one, you mentioned Wes Westrum, no one forgets the New York Giants playing the Brooklyn Dodgers. And the rivalry set up way before Ralph Branca and Bobby Thompson.
Oh, yeah, Leo DeRocher. I was lucky enough to spend a little time with Leo when I worked with Mizuno Sporting Goods. And,
wow.
Leo never held anything back. And he was a member of both those ball clubs, the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers. So he knew just how intense that rivalry was. And, he always told me, he said, let me tell you something. He goes, when you played in the old Polo Grounds in the 40s and 50s, and you saw, that you went across town and played at Ebbets Field, those were two incredible franchises that were long overshadowed, by the Yankees and the success the great Yankee dynasties had. But, much like you were talking about the Giants having to play second fiddle to the Dodgers in the early 60s, look at the Dodgers having those great teams of the 50s, and they only broke through one time to beat the Yankees. What was that, 1956, Rob?
1956, and Johnny Padres got the win. So,
I played golf with him at San Clemente Municipal Golf Course once. What a lovely man.
Later, a pitching coach made his bones in that with, I think it was Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, and he was just he transcended Brooklyn to L.A. Because he was a legitimate starter. Koufax pitched for Brooklyn. Drysdale pitched for Brooklyn. But Padres was a star in Brooklyn and later became a star in L.A. And never forget.
Ralph, did you ever get to meet Don Newcomb?
I never did. No.
What a prince of a man he was as well. I look at him as one of the long-lost heroes of American sports. He told me a story about Campy Campanella once that was incredible. And, you know, Campy had the really terrible, devastating accident before they made the transition from Brooklyn to L.A. And if you recall, the old Coliseum had the Chinese fence that was 250 feet down the left field line, you know, looking over the western or the eastern sidelines of what would be the football Coliseum. And, you know, he always told me, he goes, Artie, Campy hit a lot of high fly balls to left field. He said, if he would have got a chance to play in the old Coliseum with that you know, fence in left field, he said, I think Campy might have hit 75 or 80 home runs.
Well, would not surprise me. I did meet Johnny Roseborough, speaking of Campy, and you may or may not remember that I told you I was the Tops representative in the California League and the Northwestern League in the 80s and 90s. And Rosie was Rosie was a rover. He'd go from minor league team to minor league team. And I got to talk to him, and I looked him in the eye, and I said, was it ever okay between you and Juan Marichal? And he looked, and he was skeptical of answering, because the word was that they had made up, that all was well. But he said, you get hit in the head with a baseball bat, it's never the same. I mean, and I think that
I heard that same story from Junior Gilliam, and I kind of agree. I think there might have been like a symbiotic respect, but I think if someone hits me over the head with a baseball bat, that's going to leave just a little bit of hard feelings for quite a long time.
Just a few memories there. They made it up. They made up for the good of baseball, I guess. But as a Giant fan, I have never been more embarrassed by anything the Giants have ever associated with the Giants. That was horrible.
Do you remember when Maury Wills used to come to town in Old Candlestick and playing along, you know, from first base to second base was like playing in a bunker at the beach.
It was Alvin Dark's swamp. And Alvin Dark would water that.
Maury Wills got the first time he took off for second base, it was like he stepped in 6 feet of quicksand.
You know, if there's ever someone I would like to meet or talk to, it's Maury Wills. And I'll tell you why. As the Tops representative, I got the job only because Maury Wills held out in the minors and wouldn't sign the contract. So what Tops did, and he didn't sign the contract.
That's when he was playing for Montreal? Is that right?
No, it could have been. But he never had a Tops card for a long time. And Tops changed their way of doing things. They used to scout players in the minors and sign the people that they thought would make it.
Yeah.
Well,
we did the same thing at Mizuno.
Right, exactly.
Try to get them when they're young enough, and it won't cost you too much.
Right, exactly. But they changed their MO because of that, and they ended up signing everybody in the minors to a contract. If you were signed in the minors, you got a contract that would assure you of making big bucks when and if you make the majors.
When we're talking big bucks, with guys
Right.
like Dustin Johnson getting $150 million from the new Saudi-backed golf league. What was big bucks in the 50s and 60s? Like a couple $100,000?
Well, if you made $100,000 in the 50s, you were living high.
So you were Ted Williams or Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays in those days, huh?
Right, but the problem was there were few and far between, and the majority of players were struggling, and they were locked into a situation where if you signed with a major league team, they could keep you in the minors for your entire career. If you played behind somebody who was great, for instance, Hank Sauer started and played behind Lou Gehrig for a while. So he wasn't going anywhere, and he ended up being traded. But a lot of folks lost their careers to circumstance, being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I imagine it was a lot easier. You know, I tell people this today. If you're going to be in a minor league system, I think you want to play for the Pirates or the Orioles, as per the Yankees or the Dodgers. I think you got a better chance of getting to the big leagues with a crack. Hey, you know what kind of bummed me out yesterday? I got to talk to you about this, Ralph. Yesterday was Lou Gehrig Day. Now, Lou Gehrig, in my mind, is one of the great American heroes. I mean, he stood for everything that this country believes in. You know, I mean, whether it's umpiring Little League games and the pride of the Yankees, even if that might, who knows if that's true or not. But my point is, nobody talks about Lou Gehrig Day. And all of a sudden, I see the patches on the players yesterday, and it occurred to me that I follow sports very closely. I never heard that it was going to be Lou Gehrig's Day yesterday, June 2nd, 2022.
Well, I'm learning about that for the first time. Wow.
Doesn't that strike you as very odd?
You know what strikes me as odd is that my mother attended the speech, the Lou Gehrig, I'm the luckiest man in the world. My mother's 19. She lived in Mount Kisco, New York, and my father got her and a girlfriend some ticket. One of her girlfriends, a couple of what they called ducats in those days. And now, let me tell you this. Lined up next to Lou Gehrig were the Washington Senators. And if you look at a picture of that, George Case, whose son, George Case III, is a regular podcaster on Comfortably Zoned Radio Network and has been for years. And my mother, who wasn't really a big baseball fan per se, took the family, her and my dad, to Washington in 1961. And George Case, Sr., was coaching third for that expansion Washington Senator team. Mickey Vernon.
They were the Washington Senators, weren't they, in those days, with their red uniforms?
Absolutely. And this was the original expansion. They expanded twice, which makes baseball clownish as far as I'm concerned. Moving franchises is the biggest sin in history.
And you know what? We're probably going to see it happen next year, Ralph. I think the Oakland A's are destined for Las Vegas.
I do too.
I think the president, Dave Cavall, has picked a couple of locations. I think there's just so much money involved, and the fact that the city of Oakland has not gone forward with their, proposed stadium on the bay there, which I thought looked fantastic. What a great idea for rejuvenating the Oakland area. But it's just California politics is just unbelievable at this point in time. Nobody can see eye to eye on very, very much. And, I look at the great the great tradition of the Oakland A's, whether it's Charlie Finley and the elephant, and we go back to when he wanted to have orange baseballs, and I think
and then came Billy Ball.
Yes, and one of my favorites of all time, Bill King doing the games with Monty Moore. Those were halcyon days, and a lot of people don't recall the fact that in the early 70s, the Oakland A's were 3-time world champions. And, I mean, they still didn't draw very well, even back then, and it's a real travesty in my mind.
Well, the fan base is there. In 1989, when they played the year they played the Giants and the year of the earthquake, both teams drew very, very well, and it's marketing, it's owners that didn't want to put any money into it. Haas left. It's been horrible. But my point is, originally, was that each city should have eminent domain. And if the owner doesn't want the franchise, it should be offered to a local ownership that will avoid moving. I was an 11-year-old kid when the Giants and Dodgers left. It broke my frickin' heart, and I was affected for the rest of my life. Looking for a replacement.
What's sad about that, what's really sad about that, is there was a long period of time before the New York Mets came out with Casey Stengel as an expansion team, and they took the colors of the Giants and the Dodgers, melded them together, the orange of the Giants, the blue, the blue of the Mets, the blue of the Dodgers, and that's how the Metropolitans became, the colors that they had. And a lot of people, I was a real big fan of the Mets for many, many years, and I got to be honest with you, I love what's going on right now. I looked at the standings this morning, and the New York Mets and the New York Yankees are both, on top of baseball. Who would have thought that the Mets would have a 9.5-game lead over the world champion Atlanta Braves, and that Joe Girardi would be giving his marching papers, on the first week of June. What are your thoughts on that, Ralph?
Well, I just want to tell you, there's a great series going on between the Dodgers and those Mets, and it will tell a lot. These next 10 days will tell a lot about the Mets. They are really facing the road trip from hell, and we'll see how they do. But they have already exceeded expectations, given the fact that DeGrom and Scherzer and McGill are all hurt. 3 starting pitchers, the 3 best starting pitchers, and what they do is come back. They don't quit. Game after game.
That 7-run comeback against the Phillies, I think that's about the end for Joe Girardi in the very final analysis.
Right. He couldn't quell that, and you got to think, if you're the owner, what a mindset that is for a team.
Let me ask you a question. Would you ever think that any NFL or Major League Baseball or NBA franchise would approach $6 billion? The Broncos are looking right now with 3 different ownership groups at up to $5 billion for the Patrick Bowlen Trust. I mean, would you have ever thought that we would see the amount of money that's in professional sports?
Oh, no. In a word, the money becomes monopoly money.
Yeah.
And so people can't appreciate that a player is making $10 million a year. Do you know what that's more money than Artie made in 3 years?
How about my lifetime?
All right. Couldn't imagine.
I was laughing about it the other day. I said, one of the things I worry about, and I mean, I really do, because I love sports, and I love, baseball. We grew up in that era. I'm in my mid-60s, and I look at things now, and I say, gosh, I used to be able to go to the ball game with my dad, whether it was Anaheim Stadium or Yankee Stadium. He took me to all the great stadiums, Wrigley Field, and we'd sit down, and the tickets were $4, $5, $6 for good seats. We'd sit out in the pavilion at Dodger Stadium for $5. We'd buy our hot dog, we'd have our soda pop, maybe save some money for a malt later in the game, and we'd get out of there for $25, honestly, Ralph. And I was thinking the other day, I looked at the Dodger tickets, I looked at the Giants tickets, I looked at what it costs for a beer. It's to the point where you really can't afford to take a family of 5, mom, dad, and 3 kids, to the game. It's going to wind up costing you over $1,000.
It could, really. It's crazy, and the problem is that the kids are not exposed to it because the family.
My theory is rather than see empty seats in stadiums, go to the elementary schools, go to the baseball coaches at the high schools and the little leagues and all that, and say, hey, we'll give you tickets for the kids if you bring some chaperones and buy a couple of tickets. We'll make sure they get a good deal on their hot dog and their soda pop. That's how you build great camaraderie and build a fan base for the future. It's the kids.
If a kid grows
right
up,
now, this is what Manfred's not doing in MLB.
If a kid grows up with no memories because he doesn't get to see All-Star games because they play or World Series games, what's going to encourage a kid to pay $250 for a ticket?
I agree.
And when I talk about it, I become saddened because
I do too.
It's not just a game. And at one time, it was the game. And
what was it called? It was called America's Pastime, baseball, hot dogs, and Chevrolet, right?
Right. That I still see Dinah Shaw.
Yeah.
Kissing everybody goodnight.
I remember working for Mizuno in 1980, being down in the old Vero Beach Dodger training camp, and Tommy Lasorda is in there, and Jerry Royce brings in this plaque that says, "Please don't feed the manager," right? And he puts it up, and I mean, they tap the thing in there, and all of a sudden we hear this volcano go off in his office. With every possible bad word you could ever say. And Tommy comes out, and he knows it was either Jerry Royce or Don Sutton or Garvey or Lobster, one of those guys that did it. And then here comes Frank Sinatra, and Frank turns around and says, "Hey, do you like the sign I got you, Tommy?"
What's really interesting is that when Frank Sinatra was young, and it was his day before Elvis, he was a great Giant fan.
Yes.
Ella Fitzgerald was a great Giant fan. It was just different. Life was different, and I'm resigned to that. So let me just take the cause for what's going on and what I wanted to talk to you about. I think that Gabe Kapler, because of the stand he made with the national anthem, will eventually cost him. I just believe that. It was.
Do you think he's going to go through a situation much like Kaepernick did in the NFL, where because of his stand or kneel, we have to explain that, it could come down to affecting his ability to actually perform or get the opportunity to perform as a manager, huh?
Well, I thought for sure Kaepernick would have been hired by the Raiders recently. They reputedly.
I think Mark Davis might be up to his ass in alligators. Honestly, Ralph.
What is your opinion?
Well, I mean, I'm just telling you everything that I've heard of and heard from. You know, they had so many changes in their front office. 2 different presidents, 2 different vice presidents. This John Gruden situation. You know, you had to believe that the NFL was highly aware of this prior to him signing a 10-year, $100 million contract. Okay, if these emails went back to George Allen's son, who was the president of the Redskins, I mean, we're talking 10, 12, 14 years ago. You've got owners like Dan Snyder. You've got owners, like the Miami owner, Stephen Ross, who's talking about throwing football games to get better draft picks. And now you got what's going on in Vegas with Mark Davis. And, I wonder if there's something really implicit going on that we're not aware of that's happening in the NFL, because it is the NFL billion-dollar boys club. And, they always say they want things done not in the open, transparent. They want to have an independent arbiter with nobody else around decide these cases. And I think that leaves themselves wide open for a lot of speculation. And I think the Raiders franchise is in deep trouble right now, just at the time when they hire a guy like Josh McDaniels. They have the amount of players they need to compete in the great AFC West. And now they're having, this dumpster fire they have to deal with called Mark Davis. And the NFL has 3 of those problems on their hands. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But I just feel like it's a sad, sad byline, because these owners have so much great things to live for. And for them to do the things they do to wind up tripping themselves up, it just makes you wonder what's really going on a deeper level.
Well, may I skip back a little bit in our conversation? We're talking about Campy and the tragedy. They came out in 1958. In the winter of 57, Campanella was tragically injured, became a quadriplegic. And I just want to, and I've made a point of doing this every time I hear Campanella's name, and especially when I think of ownership. One of the most hated men in the entire world was Walter O'Malley. And there, as far as I'm concerned, there wasn't much redeeming that you could say about Walter O'Malley. But in 1959, Walter O'Malley sold out the Coliseum and donated the proceeds to Campy, and so he'd be well taken care of. And I still remember when, like 79,000, it might have been 90,000.
92,000 people, they lit matches and lighters.
Yes.
To honor Roy Campanella, if I'm not mistaken. Is that not true?
Yes, it is. And that, when I think of a hated man like Walter O'Malley who could do something like that, it gives me hope that there are owners that will take the right path in some way that we can't even predict. We don't even know who these owners are, but there will be people to lead sports, lead the country back. Whatever it is, we need humans to step up. We need
now more than ever, Ralph. Now more than ever. You're 100% right. Take
right.
the high road. And you know what? It all comes down to what my dad said many, many years ago: reading, writing, and arithmetic. He goes, you got to teach the kids. Our kids have to be educated at the highest level of all time for us to compete on a worldwide stage. And we forgot that somewhere down the line. I don't know what happened. I don't know where it happened. I used to coach high school football in the 80s, late 80s. I saw the kids change from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s, and I have not been involved in it for the last 20 years, other than teaching golf to some young kids and some football guys that I give a little advice to. But, there's still some great kids out there that deserve the very best. And our future is incumbent on us as men and women and adults, giving these kids the dream that if they work hard at something, they can prosper.
And where it starts is preschool, teaching kids, like your dad says, reading, writing, and arithmetic. The 3 R's, I'll bet he pronounced it.
And you know where I've become a pretty successful journalist, according to some people, other people not so much. But the bottom line is I learned how to read because I loved my sports heroes. I read about Mel Ott. I read about Joe DiMaggio. I read about Willie Mays in the little books. I couldn't get enough sports stuff to read. And, I think back to that. And because of that, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship, an academic football scholarship to University of Southern California and, make a better life for myself and my family. And it's all because that quest for knowledge, Ralph, and that belief in wanting to know what's going on out there.
And it starts with your parents, our parents, grandparents, having a library, having books to show the kids. So what I always recommend to my listening audience is that if they want to do something really good for the future of society, box up some lightly used children's books of all topics and take them to the Head Start program wherever you live.
I love that.
You like that? Because
I do. Because you know what they say about reading? Reading is fundamental.
Right.
And the best part of that is the first 3 letters of the word fundamental.
Oh, and if it ain't fun, it shouldn't be getting done. Nobody knows that more than you and I, because we refuse to make it work. Make it work, not make it work, but make work out of it.
So, Ralph, you were talking about Smokey Burgess a little earlier before we got on the air.
Fred
I got to watch Smokey Burgess as a young kid when the Los Angeles Angels played at Old Dodger Stadium, and he came to town at the end of his career. And I'm trying to think of who he was playing for, because he was he was old. Let's put it that way. But I do remember
he looked old when he was 22.
There you go. But he had a pinch hit double, and I'll never forget my father saying to me, he goes, that guy right there may be the greatest pinch hitter in the history of Major League Baseball.
All right. And who replaced him in that role?
Manny Mota, I guess.
Manny Mota. What goes around comes around.
Because of the DH, the pinch hitter has almost become obsolete. Much like in Major League Baseball, the stolen base has become obsolete.
The hit and run has become obsolete.
Yeah, hitting behind the runners, moving the runners up, another concept.
Remember what Willie Keeler, and he was before my time.
Hit them where they ain't, baby.
Hit them where they ain't. And I'll tell you what, if Willie Keeler were playing today with that attitude, he'd hit 600 against the shift.
If they ever put a shift on against Matty Alou or Rod Carew or any of these guys, they would just reach out, or Tony Gwynn, they would hit 600. They just reach out and hit a ground ball to the left side, base hit. It would wind up being a double. Or dump a bunt down the third base line.
Yeah. Mickey Mantle was a great bunter, a great drag bunter. And
how could it not be? Ran to first base in 3.1 seconds.
Well, not too bad. Not too bad. Hey, Artie, another great show. That's 2 in a row. Thank you, my friend.
God bless you, Ralph. let's hope and see that you're pinch hitting tonight on Sports Overnight America, because we got to
If
get
I'm
off
not,
here. We got to
if
call
I'm
in
not,
and see what's going on.
I'll be ready. I got my smoky face on, and
Good.
I'm always ready to go. Give my
Thank
best
you
to
for the
Fred.
opportunity, Ralph, and I love you and all your listeners out there. Have a great, great weekend.
Artie, you'll come back, I trust.
I definitely will, Ralph.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Bye.
Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all, but I sure can produce. Artie, thank you again. Thank you for listening, everybody. Adios and happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.